philosopher, writer, researcher, scientist, engineer, craftsman, teacher, focused on metaphysics and the preciousness of life on this planet. He's also the founder of CEO and Magic Flight. But one of the things that I love about what Forrest said as we were chatting earlier, I want to really be known and remembered for my heart, not my intellect.
It is truly an honor to be here. When I was preparing for this evening, I was reminded of some advice that I received about how to give a good speech. And part of it was to think about it from the point of view of the listener. And it was basically 3 questions. Who are you? What's your story? And why should we care? And it's really a provocation to get down to the level that actually matters. And I've spent a lot of my life thinking about things at the level of foundation. I got extremely curious about the nature of reality, the nature of how things are held up, and the concepts that are essentially at the very foundations of what we would think about science and technology and stuff like that. And so I became very interested in ultimate questions. What is? How do we know? And what is the basis of care? Where do we hold these values that we have? On what basis do they have origin? And to really consider these topics, I mean, these topics are ancient topics. Like to ask what is the question of ontology. It goes all the way back to the Greeks. And how do we know is the question of epistemology. How do we know anything at all? What is the nature of knowledge? And then axiology is the basis of care. It's where do our values come from? Where do our capacities to be alive in the sense of connecting with one another about things that actually matter? And so, in many cases, these questions might not seem to be relevant to daily life, but it turns out that when we're faced with ultimate questions, like what is going to be the fate of this planet over the long term, like over the next 1,000 years, and when you find yourself in deep reverence for the value of life on this earth, and I want to contextualize that a little bit to sort of explain just how this lands. At the beginning of this conference, feels like days ago now, but one of the videos that was in the very beginning was talking about cosmology. And so there's this question, like, how precious is life? How does it show up in the sphere of the universe, in the totality of what is? And to give you a sense as to just how remarkable, just how incredibly unique and beautiful and worthy that life is on this planet, to really just connect with that. There's 700 billion stars that we can see. And the universe is probably infinitely vaster than that. That just happens to be what is within range of the best telescopes that we can make, within range of essentially how far light has traveled since the ostensible beginning of the universe, 14.5 billion years ago, or thereabouts. And when you think that all of those worlds, and in all of the analysis and all of the stuff that we've done to find other life in the universe, we don't see any of it. We don't experience any technological signatures, any indication, any communications that we have awareness of as a planet, that there's other life forms, other planets out there that have life on it. It would seem like that's a lot of space. And so if we look at that, we basically say, well, if I evaluate just how unlikely life is, it's like winning the lottery, except that it's 1 to 10 to the 33 to 1 against. Most lotteries aren't anywhere near that hard to win. This would be those urns that you pull a ball out of, and it's mostly white balls, but if you get the red one, you win. Okay, well, you know how fine talcum powder is, or like a really fine powder? How big a ball would you need to have in order to, if you pick that 1 grain, that would be the likelihood that you won this world, that you became alive on this planet? It'd be as if the entire world was one giant ball of the finest dust, and only 1 single grain of that is red. Try to imagine how unlikely, in the vastness of all of that if you reached in with a pair of tweezers and at random and you happened to pick that 1 red grain. That's how sacred life is in this world. It's incomparable. Our religions have in the most exalted sense of sacredness that any religion has ever had about the meaning of life and the basis of that, it doesn't come even close to describing that level of sacredness, that level of unicity. So those are the table stakes. And so when we're considering ultimate questions, we have to think in terms of like what actually is, what is the basis by which we make choices around these kinds of the ultimate things. Say, for example, somebody walks up to you and you know, they know that you're interested in, you know, G20 issues, or that you're interested in the rainforest, or you're interested in global warming, or to work on any of the major problems. And they basically say, I'll write you a check for $10 billion. What are you going to do? Right? There's a sense in which now all of a sudden you're put in a position where you're basically realizing, well, this is bigger than I can myself understand. It's bigger than I can possibly do myself. So then what happens is you say, okay, well, I need a team of people, and I need to have those teams of people connected to all the stakeholders that are involved, because something like the Amazon rainforest as an ecosystem is fantastically complex. So as a result, you have to, in a sense, find a way with this community of people that you've created to make choices about an ecosystem that are commensurate with the actual value of the ecosystem. Like if we were to try to describe how valuable that ecosystem was, we're basically having to use, again, exponential notation, like 1 quadrillion dollars, right? The entire economic value of everything that we've ever done, every transaction that has ever happened in all of humanity isn't even close to that. It's like not even a rounding error. So if we think that the invisible hand of Adam Smith, of the notion of the market is going to make intelligent choices with respect to ecosystems, it just isn't going to work. And when we think about the kinds of capacities the current governance systems have to make choices in this same space, even if you had, you know, the perfect meritocracy and it's provided with advisors that are giving them good advice, the best possible advice 24/7, and each of those advisors is receiving advice from another 12 advisors, and you extend that, it still doesn't have enough information processing capacity to get anywhere near the level of wisdom that is actually required to process questions around ecosystems. And this is the heritage. This is the gift that we have been given, that we are now in stewardship of. So in this particular sense, it comes down to how do we do community governance in a way that has a level of wisdom adequate to address the concerns that are the concerns of our time. And I want to point out something that's actually quite interesting. So when I look at metaphysics and I get down to the root of it, I basically notice that there is this notion of the real. And we can understand the notion of the real as the relationship between the subject and the object. That's what metaphysics is ultimately about, right? The notion of being and the notion of knowing, it all connects to the way in which we have a relationship between the subjective and the objective, and that relationship is primary. And then when we think about the basis of that relationship, we come to concepts like choice and change and causation. And what got us to this particular era today is essentially a kind of mastery of causation. If you look at the ancient world, like before history, where humanity was living in the context of nature, they had to master change. They have to master change. They have to be able to, indigenous cultures essentially have developed a capacity to live in the flux of change and develop deep skills in that sense. But when you come into the modern era, we have mastered causation. Science is essentially the study of causation, and technology is the application of it. And so in effect, everything we see around us, the microphone and all the electronics that make it possible for you to even hear my voice so clearly, all of this stuff is broad changes of causations applied over and over and over again. But what's interesting is that all of the problems that we actually have, all of the things that are essentially unsolvable with any amount of science and technology, all have to do with the nature of choice. So in effect, the future of our humanity, the future of the well-being of this world, is ultimately going to rest on the skillfulness with which we make choices. Because technology can tell us what we can do, but it won't tell us what we ought to do. And this ethical gap between the two, those are the principles that make effective choice. We are a species that has learned how to do technology, but we haven't learned how to apply it in a good way. And all of the evolutionary knowledge that we've received from 4.5 billion years of skill building that is built into our very cells and bones cannot have prepared us for the choices that we still have to make. So why is community important? Because it's the matrix within which the wisdom necessary for the choices we need to make can actually arise. And so in effect, what we're looking at is how do we come to a basis where we connect to the level of care that informs our choices, in a sense, rather than believing that we can't do it and therefore we must have some AI do it, that it is actually possible for us to connect with one another in a profound enough way, not at the level of intellect, but at the level of feeling. I'm not so interested in questions about why you think what you do. I'm interested in how you feel, and ultimately of the basis from which that feeling comes. Because in this sense, in the capacity for us to attune to one another and to be discerning about what is actually happening, as a continual sensing into the feeling on an ongoing basis, to really be in deep attunement and deep discernment. That as we, in that process of connecting together in that one way, like musicians that are listening so carefully to one another, that the music becomes alive in the way in which the organism of the whole of the group enters into a process that transcends rational thought. Because in effect, without distinguishing between instinct and intellect and knowing where intuition actually comes in, where the basis of our connection to our feelings, our connection to our cares, unless we convey to one another the basis of our feeling, the basis of our care, the basis from which the love of life itself emerges. When we can connect at that level, we can together develop the level of wisdom necessary. This is why community is the answer. No institution can do this. Institutions, in the sense of human relationships, we have relationships of care, transaction, and power. Institutions are basically hierarchies. They're power systems with transaction reinforcing them. But communities are based upon care. So in effect, one of the things that we need to discern and to distinguish is what kinds of relationships are we really in? What are the habits that pull us back into ways of thinking about transaction, ways of thinking about power? In effect, when we get to a place where we are strong in our care, we hold in the depths of the love that we have for the vitality of the wildness of this world. When we are grounded in that, the strength of our care can overcome the power that others hold. But what is even more important is the degree to which, in our own sense of attaching and connecting to the depths and the origin of our own care, that we can transcend the power that we hold. And it's important to know the difference between strength and power. Power is a force that overcomes a resistance within a given period of time. Strength is an ability to endure many forces and yet remain true to yourself, true to your purpose, true to the meaningfulness that drives your life. And in the same sort of way that the metaphysics involves all of these triples, you'll notice choice, change, and causation, or if I'm talking about the universe, about creation, existence, and interaction, and that these concepts connect to one another in discrete ways. But if I'm looking at how do I create a mastery of choice, I'm going to notice that I need to, in a sense, be in contact with the ultimate nature from which choice comes. Choice is fundamentally cooperative. None of us make choices by ourselves. It is an illusion to think that we make choices. It is more correct to say that choice makes self. You are the product of all the choices you have made and all the choices you could make. So in this sense, if we're going to create a world that is thriving and abundant, we have to let go of the belief, the idea that causation can solve all problems. Because if it could, it would have already. It's like the world is presented with a crop of new problems every year, and then we use the toolkit we have, the civilization toolkit that is created out of a deep knowledge of causation, but it does not allow us to solve all problems. And the critique is noticing all the places where causation, where system, where bureaucracy, where financial systems, where governance systems, where all of the ways in which the existing tool set does not work. Things like global warming and inequality and pollution, all of these issues are essentially the kinds of issues that no amount of system can address. So what do? We let go of what we think of as the rules, and we enter the liminal space. And we touch the essence of principle. We must be naked before the truth. What got us here won't get us there. And to have the level of humility necessary to directly encounter the problem, to be willing to be present with the pain. This teaches us the language of the problem and therefore gives us the capacity to recognize the language of the solution. We become, by letting go of doing and residing in being, we create the capacity to become the solution. You cannot make creation happen. You cannot compel choice with causation. You cannot use the complicated to contain the complex. The omniscient can only be in service to the transcendent. So in this sense, when we're looking at what are the bases of our care, how do we create clarity to move beyond unconscious instinct driving intellect, to move us into the delusion that more and more modernism, more and more causation, more and more of what got us here could be the answer. At some point, we recognize that it doesn't necessarily matter what the systems are anymore. It matters from the basis from which we move. And so in a sense, by attuning to one another and discerning that particular basis, we can discover what the care is that drives our lives. And if we hold that care that we have with each other, if we're in true attunement and we are in a sense genuinely in relationship of actual listening to the feelings, the basis from which we come can become apparent. Our values can become emergent. And in this particular way, change becomes possible because we all care. If you're sitting here in this room, if you're alive at all, you care. I don't have to create care for you. You have it within you innately. All of us know the basis of love. All of us are in the practice of love. Love is that which enables choice. It is the potential that transforms. It creates clarity. Isn't just an ability to see through, it's an ability to move through. And in that sense, it provides a capacity to transform us from being the problem to being the solution. For as long as we regard ourselves as some sort of disease, we will manifest that. But when we recognize collectively together, and we recognize each other and we hold the love that we each have, genuinely, deeply, and not having it get co-opted into, if we're discerning enough, to not let it get co-opted into the habits of mind that are associated. All of us are steeped in thousands of years of transactional and power-based process. And it's not to say that those have no value or that they will go away, but just that they can't be the basis. In the same way that care can be co-opted by transaction, and transaction can be co-opted by power, that it is actually also the case that there is no form of power that cannot be subsumed by love. And I know this sounds like some sort of Pollyanna kind of metaphysical wumbo-jumbo, pie in the sky, utopian sort of way of thinking. But it turns out that these ideas are not without basis. That in effect, the very deepest essence of what it means to be rational allows us to understand that the irrational also matters. That love doesn't have a reason, and it doesn't need one. Life doesn't have a reason, and it doesn't need one. And the same triple of meaningfulness and value and purpose. We tend to think in terms of abstract values rather than embodied ones. And we tend to think in purposes which are mutually exclusionary. But in a sense, we can have connection to meaning that gives life to value and to purpose, that gives direction to those things. So in a sense, part of the notion is to connect to the clarity of what is the meaning of our love? What is the basis by which our lives have meaning with one another? That we create belongingness for one another in the attunements that we have. And we don't let these mechanisms by which we weaponize belongingness in some sort of way of controlling people, or we've created some sort of way in which we've got deluded that power would be an answer. It was an answer for an earlier problem, but it's not an answer for the problems we now face. Strength is the answer. And so in this particular sense, we're looking to now guide our lives on the basis of what actually matters. If we're in the context of the whole of the universe, there is no meaningfulness that is not alive, and there is no life that is not meaningful. In this sense, it is profoundly important Do we recognize and honor the gift of the life that we have been given? And to hold that in balance with the service that we do for one another, the trust in which we hold to one another, the attunements that we create with one another, to really deeply, actually listen. Not for the ideas or the ideologies, but from the moment and the impetus from which we move. To be drawn forward into the future by the intuition that there is a way. And to have that connect to intellect in a way that actually creates clear sense as to how we can essentially work and cooperate with one another. How we can actually create the kinds of communities and the kinds of governance architectures that can genuinely be a right steward of the resources that one can be given to solve problems at a global scale. What would it take to create that kind of community? What would it take to create that kind of collaboration? What does it mean to get love right? Love is not just a feeling, it is a practice. And it is a practice that can be done with skill. Love is that which enables choice. Love is always stronger than fear. Always choose on the basis of love. Namaste.